People always talk about karma, about how heaven and hell are states of mind we create for ourselves. And after what happened, I believe it. I live alone in a downtown Seattle apartment, a high-rise with all the amenities you'd think would make life feel safer. It was a late night. I'd been at the police station to give a statement about a coworker's death. He'd passed away under complicated circumstances, and I was exhausted by the time I finally got back home. I dropped my bag, got into the shower, hoping to wash away the stress of the day. As I was washing my hair, the water suddenly shut off, and I was left standing there, frustrated, cold, and irritated. The abrupt silence, the sudden chill of the water stopping midstream, was jarring. It was a small thing, a mundane inconvenience in the grand scheme of things, but it set a tone, a discordant note in the otherwise quiet evening. I grumbled under my breath, the frustration a physical weight in my chest. It mirrored the exhaustion I felt, a heavy blanket of weariness that settled over me after the day's events. I grabbed a towel, dried off, and threw on some clothes. All I wanted was to zone out, to let the day's events fade into a blurry background. I went to the living room and turned on the TV, flipping through channels until I landed on a mindless sitcom. My eyelids started to droop, the warmth of the room and the gentle hum of the television lulling me into a state of near sleep. But just as I was starting to drift, I noticed something on the screen that jarred me awake. At first, I thought it was just the channel, a glitch in the signal, or a strange angle of a scene. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was my apartment on the screen. My very own living room, the familiar layout of my furniture, the worn rug I'd bought at a garage sale, the framed poster of the Seattle skyline I'd had since college. It was all there, captured in a grainy, slightly distorted image. It was like someone had hidden a camera in there, a clandestine observer capturing my private space without my knowledge. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat like a startled bird. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a prank? A glitch in the system? Or something far more sinister? I glanced around the room, a wave of paranoia washing over me. Was someone watching me right now? Had someone been watching me all along? Then I saw a hand, a pale, slender hand, reach out toward the back of my head, like it was about to grab me. It was fleeting, a ghost of a movement, but it was there. In an instant, I whipped around, my heart pounding in my ears, a frantic rhythm that echoed the turmoil in my mind. But there was no one there. My living room was empty, the only sound the hum of the television. I looked back at the screen, and it was just static now, flickering harmlessly. The image of my apartment vanished. But that uneasy feeling, like someone was watching, a prickling sensation at the nape of my neck stuck with me. I tried to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling. I'd always felt safe living alone. I'd chosen this apartment specifically for its security features, the high-rise building, the 24-hour security desk, the promise of being safely tucked away in the heart of the city. But something about that night changed things. It shattered the illusion of safety, the comforting bubble of solitude I'd built around myself. The world outside my apartment seemed a little closer, a little more menacing. I finally drifted off only to be woken up by the sound of running water. I got up, startled, and went to the bathroom, my mind still clouded with remnants of the unsettling experience. I found the sink on full blast, a torrent of water gushing out, soaking the counter and threatening to flood the floor. I hadn't turned it on. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat that wouldn't stop. I shut it off, the sudden silence deafening after the roar of the water. I crawled back into bed, doing my best to ignore the growing sense of dread, burying myself under the covers as if that could somehow shield me from the unseen forces at play. The days that followed were a blur of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being under surveillance. The city noises, once comforting ambient sounds, now seemed like whispers, murmurs of unseen eyes following my every move. I found myself checking locks multiple times, glancing over my shoulder, listening for any unusual sounds. My once peaceful apartment felt like a stage, and I was the unwitting actor in a play I didn't understand. A few nights later, Mike, my boyfriend, came over for dinner. He'd been wanting to see me, to make sure I was okay after the ordeal with my coworker. I had the evening planned out perfectly, a simple but comforting meal of pasta and salad, a chance to reconnect and relax. When he rang the bell, I opened the door with a smile, relief washing over me at the sight of his familiar face. But when I turned to show him in, he wasn't there. My smile faltered, replaced by a confused frown. I called his name. "Mike?" My voice echoed in the hallway, a thin thread of sound in the sudden silence. I looked down the hall, peering into the darkness, but nothing. Just the empty space of my hallway, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air, a phantom reminder of his presence. Just as I was starting to feel seriously creeped out, the doorbell rang again. This time, when I opened the door, he was actually standing there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, his usual easy smile gracing his face. He noticed my face, the confusion and slight fear etched on my features. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he chuckled, his voice warm and reassuring. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. I let him in, telling myself it was just stress, the lingering effects of the events of the past few days. As we sat down to eat, I felt the tension ease up. We were laughing, talking about our day, getting comfortable, the warmth of his presence a comforting counterpoint to the lingering uneasiness. But then, halfway through our meal, the doorbell rang again. I got up, thinking it must have been a neighbor, a forgotten errand or a simple mistake. When I opened the door, there was Mike, standing there again, with the same bouquet of sunflowers, smiling as if he'd just arrived. I stared at him, my heart sinking into my stomach. I turned around, and the Mike who had been inside with me, the one who was laughing and talking just moments before, was gone. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. I locked it, the click of the deadbolt a small, comforting sound in the face of the growing fear. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind reeling from the impossible scene I'd just witnessed. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone, my fingers clumsy and fumbling. I needed to call someone, to tell someone what had just happened. But as I looked at the phone, the words caught in my throat, a lump of terror blocking my voice. How could I explain this? What would anyone believe? Mike, outside the door, started knocking, his voice muffled and distorted by the wood. "Hey, are you okay? You just slammed the door. Is everything all right?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't face him, couldn't explain the impossible situation I was in. I sank to the floor, the fear overwhelming me. The sense of being watched, the feeling of intrusion, it was intensified now, a tangible pressure in the air. Mike eventually went away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. He called later, concerned and insistent that I tell him what was wrong. I managed to stammer out a weak excuse, a vague mention of stress and exhaustion. He insisted I come over the next day, that he would take care of me. But I couldn't bring myself to see him, not after what I'd experienced. The thought of facing him, of explaining the impossible, the terrifying reality of what was happening, was too much to bear. He was understanding, but his concern was a constant reminder of the impossible situation I was in. The fear lingered, a constant companion, a shadow that followed me everywhere. Later that night, he fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from his worry and my vague explanations. I lay in bed, watching the shadows in my room, terrified of the silence, of the growing feeling that I was not alone. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint buzzing sound from the kitchen. It wouldn't stop, a persistent, annoying hum that grated on my nerves. I finally got up to check it out, thinking it was the fridge, a faulty component or a buildup of frost. As soon as I opened the door, the noise stopped. I scanned the kitchen, my eyes trying to adjust to the dim light, but everything looked normal. Shaking it off as exhaustion, I grabbed a glass of water, the cool liquid a momentary comfort. I turned around to find myself face to face with my own reflection on the kitchen window. But my reflection wasn't right. The face staring back at me wasn't my own. It was similar, the same basic features, but the expression was different. It was smiling, a wide, unsettling grin, her eyes wide and empty, devoid of any warmth or recognition. It was like looking into a stranger's face, a face that was hauntingly familiar yet utterly alien. I dropped the glass, the sound of it shattering breaking the silence of the night. The shards of glass scattered across the floor like a constellation of broken promises. By the time I looked back, the reflection was gone. The kitchen window was just a dark, opaque surface, reflecting nothing but the darkness of the night. I rushed back to the bedroom, locking the door behind me, the sound of the lock clicking a desperate plea for security. I felt an overwhelming urge to check the mirror above my dresser, to see if that same unsettling smile was waiting for me there, but I couldn't bear to. The room was silent, but the air felt thick, like something was waiting for me just outside my line of sight, a presence I could feel but couldn't see. The events of the past few days had shattered my sense of reality, leaving me adrift in a sea of fear and confusion. The next day, I found myself staring at my bathroom mirror, afraid of what I might see. I remembered a comment I'd made to my coworker the week before he died, one that was harsh, unnecessary. We'd had a disagreement, a silly office squabble that escalated beyond reason. I'd told him to take a good look at himself. A cruel and thoughtless jab. He hadn't taken it well, and afterward, he'd withdrawn, shutting himself off from everyone before taking his life. It had been a heartless thing to say, a joke that I didn't think he'd take seriously, a casual cruelty that seemed insignificant at the time. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd somehow taken it personally, that my words had been a catalyst, a seed of despair planted in his already fragile mind. I remembered his sad eyes, his quiet desperation, and a wave of guilt washed over me, a heavy, suffocating blanket of remorse. I spent the next few days in a haze of guilt and fear. The events of the past few weeks seemed to coalesce into a horrifying narrative, a story of karmic retribution. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow my fault, that the events were a manifestation of my own actions, a chilling echo of the careless words I'd spoken. 2 years have passed, and I still can't look in mirrors for too long. I'll catch my reflection, and for just a split second, the face staring back at me seems like someone else's, someone watching, someone waiting. That unsettling smile, the empty eyes, they linger in the periphery of my vision, a haunting reminder of the consequences of my actions. I've changed since then, learned to be more mindful of my words, more compassionate towards others. I moved out of the apartment, unable to bear the memories that clung to its walls. I've sought therapy, trying to understand what I experienced, to make sense of the terrifying events that unfolded. But some things remain a mystery, a chilling reminder that the line between reality and something else is sometimes very thin. I still live with the fear, the lingering unease, but I also live with a newfound understanding. Heaven and hell, they are not just theological concepts, but states of mind we create through our choices, our actions. And the consequences of those actions, they can be far more profound and terrifying than we ever imagine. I believe that now, with a certainty that chills me to my core. The echoes of my past, they still linger, a haunting reminder of the power of words, the power of karma, and the chilling reality that sometimes, the things we fear the most are reflections of ourselves. It was one of those humid summer evenings in South Florida when I found myself stuck at the airport, waiting for a delayed flight. The terminal buzzed with travelers, and I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying to shake off the fatigue that had settled in. I was scrolling through my phone, half listening to the distant chatter and announcements over the PA system. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of sunscreen and stale pretzels, a familiar olfactory cocktail of airport life. My flight to New Orleans, a much-needed escape from the relentless Florida heat and the monotony of my daily routine, had been delayed indefinitely. The initial frustration had morphed into a dull ache of disappointment, a feeling that mirrored the throbbing headache that was starting to form behind my eyes. I considered grabbing another coffee, hoping the caffeine might jolt me awake, but the thought of another lukewarm cup made me shudder. As I took a sip of my existing beverage, a strange sensation washed over me. It was like a sudden drop in temperature, a fleeting chill that prickled my skin despite the oppressive humidity. I looked up, my gaze drifting towards a woman seated a few rows away. She was staring directly at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. They were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering on a horizon, and held a depth that unsettled me. A shiver ran down my spine, a feeling I couldn't quite explain. It was a primal reaction, a warning signal from some deep-seated instinct. I tried to shake it off, brushing it aside as a product of my exhaustion and frustration. Maybe she was just bored, or perhaps she had her own reasons for staring. After all, airports are full of people with their own stories, their own destinations, their own anxieties. I tried to divert my attention back to my phone, hoping to lose myself in the mindless scroll of social media, but it was no use. Her gaze was relentless, a tangible weight pressing down on me. I felt like a moth drawn to a flickering flame, unable to resist the pull of her intense stare. After a few minutes, I glanced up again, unable to bear the constant pressure of her unwavering attention. This time, she wasn't just sitting there. She was standing, and she was moving towards me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the airport's muffled hum. As she approached, I noticed details I hadn't seen before. Her hair was a wild, tangled mess, a dark brown that seemed to absorb the ambient light. Her clothes were disheveled and looked as if they hadn't been washed in days, giving her a strange, almost feral appearance. "What you saw was just effects," she said, her voice a surprisingly forceful whisper that cut through the ambient noise. It was shaky, as if she hadn't spoken in a long time, but there was an underlying authority to it, a strange conviction. Confused, I stammered, "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer, just continued to stare. Her gaze intensified, as if she was searching for something within me, peering into the deepest recesses of my soul. It felt invasive, unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something about me, something I didn't even know myself. I was about to stand up and move to another seat, to escape the intensity of her presence, when a sudden commotion erupted near the gate. A group of people was huddled around a large screen, their faces a mixture of fear and bewilderment. They gasped and pointed, their voices rising in a cacophony of murmurs. Curiosity, a dangerous impulse in situations like this, got the better of me. I stood up and joined the crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of what had caused such chaos. The screen displayed a breaking news alert, the flashing red banner stark against the otherwise mundane airport backdrop. It reported a series of bizarre occurrences happening at the airport. Passengers had reported strange noises, unexplained shadows lurking in the periphery of their vision, and a general sense of unease that had settled over the terminal. Some even claimed to have seen apparitions, fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The atmosphere in the terminal changed in an instant. The usual buzz of travel and anticipation was replaced by an unsettling tension. The air grew heavy, as if a physical weight had been placed upon us all. I instinctively turned to look for the woman, but she was gone. Vanished. As if she had never been there. Just then, a barista from the nearby coffee shop emerged, his face pale and strained. He approached me and handed me a napkin with a phone number scribbled on it. "She said to give this to you," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, a gesture of refusal to engage further. Fear was etched on his features, a reflection of the growing unease that had consumed the entire airport. The number felt like a lifeline, a connection to the unknown, a potential gateway to understanding the strange events unfolding around me. But it also felt like a curse, a summons into a realm I wasn't ready to explore. For the rest of that interminable evening, I wrestled with my decision. Should I call the number? Or should I ignore it, dismiss it as the product of a stressed mind and a delayed flight? The events of the past hour echoed in my mind, the woman's unnerving stare, the strange news report, the barista's panicked whisper. Finally, curiosity, and a desperate need to make sense of what was happening, won out. Ignoring the warning bells that clamored in my mind, I waited until I was settled in my hotel room, the sterile white walls offering little comfort. I dialed the number, my hand trembling as I held the phone to my ear. The line rang once, twice, before a soft, eerily calm voice answered. You have to listen. They're watching you. The voice was feminine, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was the same voice I had heard earlier, a voice that seemed to resonate with the darkness that had enveloped the airport. Panic gripped me, a cold fist squeezing my heart. It was as if the voice had entered my mind, bypassing my ears and speaking directly to my soul. They're watching you, it repeated, the words echoing in my head. Then, the voice began to recount details of my day, things only I would know. It described my coffee, the app one was using on my phone, the anxious glance I had given at the departure board. Every detail was accurate, pinpointing with terrifying precision the events of my day. You shouldn't have stayed at the airport, it said, its tone laced with a chilling warning. Get out while you can. I dropped the phone, the plastic hitting the floor with a sharp crack that seemed to shatter the illusion of safety I had clung to. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, the familiar and mundane replaced by a cold, terrifying unknown. Get out! The words echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain. I hung up, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The sense of being watched returned, more intense than before. It was as if invisible eyes were boring into me, dissecting my every move. I glanced out the window of my hotel room, expecting to see her standing there, her gray eyes fixed on me, but there was only the darkness of the humid South Florida night. I couldn't stay. The voice, the woman, the strange occurrences at the airport, they all screamed at me to leave. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was in danger, that something, or someone, was hunting me. I packed my bags, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I didn't bother calling anyone, didn't try to explain the irrational terror that consumed me. My logic told me no one would believe me, that I was simply succumbing to stress and fatigue. But my instincts, the primal fear that had gripped me since that initial encounter at the airport, were screaming at me to escape. I left the hotel, abandoning my belongings, my meticulously planned vacation, everything that had once felt normal. I drove through the night, fueled by panic and adrenaline, never looking back. I changed hotels every day, avoided airports, and lived in the shadow of constant unease. It's been years since that night at the airport, years of living in a state of perpetual vigilance. I still don't know what I experienced, who that woman was, or what they were. But every time I pass by an airport, a shiver runs down my spine, a reminder of the terror I felt that humid summer evening. The sense that I'm being watched never completely disappears, a constant companion that whispers in the back of my mind, a chilling reminder of the night I encountered the inexplicable. To this day, the memory of her gray eyes, the chilling whisper, the unnerving details of my day recounted by that eerie voice, haunt me. The world, before that night, was a place of predictable order, a canvas painted with the familiar colors of everyday life. Now, it's a canvas tinged with a perpetual twilight, a landscape where the line between reality and illusion is blurred, a place where the unseen always lurks, waiting for its next opportunity to emerge from the shadows. The experience has changed me, etched a permanent scar on my psyche. I am forever marked by the encounter, a living testament to the unknown forces that exist just beyond the veil of our perception. I am a shadow of my former self, cautious, wary, and haunted by the echo of a voice that whispers, "They're watching you." And perhaps they are. Perhaps, somewhere in the bustling crowds of airports, in the flickering lights of hotel rooms, in the mundane routines of everyday life, they are always watching, waiting for their next target, their next opportunity to weave their strange and terrifying threads into the fabric of reality. And I, forever scarred by that humid summer evening in South Florida, will never truly be free of that fear. Whether it's your apartment or your office building, you often feel safe thanks to the security guard. But have you ever thought about what would happen if the security guard needed security? A bizarre incident took place at the Hillcrest Business Center, a place with an eerie reputation. The elevator in the building only stopped on the second and fifth floors. The doors on the third and fourth floors were padlocked shut, leaving those floors vacant and haunted in the eyes of the locals. I had just started my new job on the fifth floor, and my coworkers warned me not to venture onto the third or fourth floors after dark. I had no intention of getting into trouble, believe me. The whispers about the building, the stories of strange noises and fleeting shadows, were just that, whispers and stories. I'd always been a rational person, a skeptic even. I chalked it all up to overactive imaginations and old wives' tales. But the Hillcrest Business Center had a way of creeping into your mind, a subtle sense of unease that clung to the air like a persistent odor. My first few weeks were uneventful. The fifth floor was bustling during the day, a hive of activity with the typical office chatter, the rhythmic clack of keyboards, and the hum of printers. I found my rhythm, settled into my cubicle, and even made a few friends. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cityscape, the building seemed to transform. The energy shifted, becoming heavy and still. The usual sounds of the city seemed to fade, replaced by an unnerving silence that amplified the slightest creak or rustle. It was on a Tuesday night, a particularly dreary one with a persistent drizzle outside, that the first truly unsettling event occurred. I was hunched over my desk, engrossed in an online news article, when a strange quiet settled over the floor. The usual after-hours hum of the computers and the distant rumble of traffic had vanished. It was as if I was the only living soul in the entire building. And then I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling my name. Ethan? My heart skipped a beat. Who could be calling me at this hour? It was almost midnight. My colleagues had left hours ago. The only other person in the building was supposed to be the security guard, a gruff, older man named Frank who always seemed to be half asleep in his little booth near the elevator. Curiosity got the better of me, as it often does. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I stood up, my legs feeling a little shaky, and headed towards the stairs. The elevator, as always, was stuck on its routine, offering no escape or solace. I ran up the stairs to the fourth floor, the echoing sound of my footsteps bouncing off the concrete walls. The air was cold and damp, and a faint, musky odor filled my nostrils. The voice, however, was now coming from the floor below. Ethan, Ethan! I hesitated for a moment, debating whether I should simply ignore it and return to my desk. But the voice, soft yet urgent, pulled me forward. I continued down the stairs, my hand instinctively reaching for the railing. The elevator, as if to mock my apprehension, ascended from the fourth floor and stopped at the third. But the voice was no longer on the third floor. It had shifted, a phantom echo, to the second floor. Ethan, over here! Gathering what little courage I had left, I continued down, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the second floor, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, distorted shadows. The elevator was there, its doors closed, unresponsive to my feeble attempts to call it. Two locked doors stood on either side of it, creating a sense of claustrophobia. The voice had stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by a faint, almost inaudible whispering sound that seemed to emanate from behind one of those locked doors. I knocked, my voice a shaky whisper. Hello? Is anyone there? The whispers intensified, a chorus of indistinct murmurs that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if 100 voices were whispering my name, each one colder, more chilling than the last. I stood there, frozen, a knot forming in my stomach. The air grew thick and suffocating, and a strange sense of dread washed over me. After what felt like an eternity, I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. It was time to run. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. As I ran past the third floor, I heard a faint, almost comical clapping sound echoing behind me, as if someone, or something, was chasing me. It sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through me. Reaching the fifth floor, I stumbled into the reception area, fumbling for the light switch. The room flooded with harsh, fluorescent light, momentarily blinding me. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to regain my composure. The frantic beating of my heart echoed in my ears. I sank into a chair at the reception desk, clutching my head in my hands, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. A few minutes later, Mike arrived for his night shift. Mike was a younger guy than Frank, considerably more energetic and less gruff. His presence brought a momentary sense of relief. "Hey, Mike," I said, my voice raspy. I don't feel so well. I think I'm going to try and get some sleep." I grabbed a blanket from a storage cupboard and awkwardly spread it out on the carpet near the reception desk. My eyes darted nervously towards the stairs, expecting to see something emerge from the darkness. But there was nothing. I tried to relax, to focus on the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner, but the sounds from below kept intruding. The faint whispers, the distant echoes of footsteps, the incessant clapping, they all seemed to seep through the concrete, invading my thoughts. I drifted into a light sleep, my mind still racing with the events of the night. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a loud thump, like a ball bouncing off the ground beneath me. It was sharp and distinct, not the faint echoes I'd been hearing. I sat up, my heart hammering in my chest. Was it just my imagination? I doubted it. Then I heard a ring. My phone. I fumbled for it, my fingers trembling. It was Mike. "Hey, Mike," I said, my voice still shaky. "Can you go downstairs and check who's below where I'm lying? I think I heard something." There was a pause, a slight crackle on the line. "I'm down here, Ethan. But it's pitch black. I can't see a thing." And then, a scream. A blood-curdling scream that seemed to shatter the night. It was short, sharp, and filled with unimaginable terror. Then silence. The line went dead. Panic seized me. I scrambled to my feet, my legs burning with a sudden surge of adrenaline. I sprinted down the stairs, my mind racing, a million horrifying scenarios flashing through my head. I burst through the door to the 4th floor, expecting to find something, anything, to explain the scream, the sudden silence. The door was wide open. The room was completely empty, the light flickering ominously. A chilling emptiness filled the space. The air was cold, carrying a faint metallic scent. I stepped into the room, my eyes darting around, searching for Mike. He wasn't there. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of anything out of the ordinary, except for the light that flickered like a dying candle. Then I looked up. Etched onto the ceiling, as if painted by an unseen hand, were handprints and footprints. They were dark, almost black, and perfectly formed. My breath hitched in my throat. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I reached for the door, a strange force seemed to push back against me. It was like an invisible wall, resisting my attempt to leave. I struggled, pushing with all my might, but the force was relentless. After what seemed like an eternity of pushing and straining, an idea struck me. I quickly let go of the door. There was a loud thud from inside, as if something heavy had fallen. Seizing the opportunity, I slammed the door shut and locked it, the sound echoing through the silent building. I could hear knocking from within, faint but insistent, as if something was trapped inside clawing to get out. The presence was undeniable, a cold, heavy weight against the other side of the door. I dashed back up the stairs, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, was palpable. The knocking seemed to echo in my footsteps, growing louder as I ran. Reaching the reception area, I noticed something out of place. Mike's night card was hanging on the outside of the office door. I turned to see him standing there, looking equally confused and slightly annoyed. "How did you get here?" I stammered, my voice ragged. "I thought you went downstairs." Mike chuckled, a sound that seemed to grate against my raw nerves. "You're not thinking straight tonight, Ethan. I've been right here for the last 15 minutes. You were out cold." I glanced at my phone. The last call, the scream, the frantic connection, it had all happened 4 hours ago. My stomach churned. The events of the night were beginning to feel like a fever dream, but the cold, metallic scent and the lingering imprint of fear in my chest were all too real. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, something I couldn't comprehend. I needed to clear my head, to get some fresh air. I'm going for a smoke break, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I walked down the stairs, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I fumbled for a cigarette, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I lit it, the warm glow of the flame a comforting counterpoint to the darkness surrounding me. And then, in the dim light, someone lit my cigarette for me. I squinted, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. There was no one there. Just the faint sound of someone or something running down the stairs below. I stubbed out my cigarette, the burning ember a stark reminder of the unsettling events of the night. I couldn't leave, not yet. I felt a strange compulsion to unravel the mystery of the Hillcrest Business Center, to understand what I had experienced. I went back to the reception and, trying to sound calm, told Mike, "Lay down on the floor and see if you can hear anything." He did, with a mixture of amusement and concern, but heard nothing. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe it was all in my head, a product of exhaustion and overactive imagination. I lay down on the floor again, trying to quiet my racing thoughts. I listened closely, ignoring the gnawing fear in my gut. And then I heard it. A voice, soft and whispery, as if speaking from a great distance. It was really hard to climb back up again. I leaped to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was not alone in this building. The Hillcrest Business Center was not just haunted, it was something far more sinister, far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. And as I stood there, bathed in the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights, I knew that my life would never be quite the same. The whispers in the walls, the echoes in the stairwells, the chilling touch of the unseen, they became a constant companion, a haunting reminder of that night, a night that shattered my belief in the ordinary and introduced me to a world beyond my wildest comprehension.